I'm joined by Jocelyn Forrence, a partner at Parallel, and a dear friend of mine, Rishabh Jain from Format. Rishabh and I have actually known each other for nearly 19 years, which makes me feel very old. But I'll actually let them introduce themselves since they know themselves best.
Thank you. I'm Jocelyn. I'm a partner at Parallel. We are a strategic investor and celebrity talent partnership studio out of LA. So basically, I'm one of 3 partners. My 2 partners are both film producers in LA. I'm full-time at Parallel, and what we do is invest and then partner our investments with celebrity talent partners. We define celebrities as like anyone who has a wide reach and a really interesting perspective. So it could be a creator, it could be an athlete, it could be a actor. And we also do that work as fee for service provider as well, if you're not raising investment or if you're not a right fit for our investment thesis.
And I'm Rishabh. As Feng said, my claim to fame is just being her friend for 19 years. So hopefully that says more than the company. But as a company, what we do is we try to help brands enable the best possible consumer experience for every piece of content they deploy. So let's just say you're running a large set of ads on Facebook or your email campaigns or your SMS campaigns. We enable you to build a full funnel experience that is unique to each of them. And so while generally this would be very expensive with developers trying to build a landing page and then customize your PDP, we actually automate that entire process. So that way the consumer has the best possible experience from content all the way down to conversion.
Awesome, thank you for that. I wanted to start just by sharing some more macro things I'm seeing just from a VC perspective. So last year, according to Carta, about 7% of venture dollars went into consumer companies. This is the lowest it's ever been since 2018. And despite consumer spending making up 2/3 of the US GDP, you'll see, as we heard in the earlier panel with Jimmy and Himesh mentioning, it's a lot harder to fundraise these days. And VCs are becoming a little bearish because consumer kind of has this bad reputation of having inflated marketing spend and lower profit margins compared to their enterprise peers. I'm happy to say that's not necessarily true. Forerunner came out with the report recently and looking at thousands of consumer companies that had raised a Series B since 2010, found that consumer companies actually had higher growth rates and higher margins compared to their enterprise peers in the year of their IPO. And so I wanted to share some of that as good news in a way. But of course, there's now a turn to making sure it's not growth at all costs anymore, and that unit economics are really important. And I shouldn't have to squint to be able to be convinced that you might be profitable one day. And so with that, I recognize, as you guys here are competing in such a fierce market, that I thought it'd be fun to chat today with my esteemed panels and talk about, growing consumer brands and doing so by optimizing ads, channels, and talent partnerships and more. So let's dive in. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about AI, since it's everything everyone's talked about. And last year, we saw record-breaking amount of capital being deployed in AI, something north of $60 billion. But those dollars were really at the infrastructure level, first of all. So we invested in Thales, next-gen AI chips, then foundational models. We are direct investors in AI, OpenAI. Tooling, we were investors in Chroma. And then the application layer, it kind of made up a tiny sliver of that funding last year. But I'm heartened because I think that as these other more picks and shovels of AI become more mature, that we'll start to see more opportunities at the application layer. And hopefully that will translate into AI being able to solve some really cool consumer problems and be able to deliver some really exciting consumer experiences. So with that, I'm curious what you guys are seeing, top brands, what are they doing in terms of using AI to differentiate their businesses? Like, where do you guys see the most potential and risks for brands, particularly from a content perspective? And maybe what are some guardrails that they should keep in mind as well?
This is more your area of expertise, so I'll keep my answer really brief. But certainly for us, particularly in the creative side in LA, like AI's here. You know, I have a lot of friends who are filmmakers. My boyfriend's a filmmaker. Like they're all already using it. So I think it's not a question of like if, but it's just like when and how much. We definitely feel like there is a place for AI in terms of like a lot of actually what Format's doing, like, you know, just sort of optimize. But I think when it comes down to just the initial creative, like AI is just not going to replace storytellers and really great, compelling creative. Like AI is not the Chubby's example of like, you know, the boss button. Like AI is not coming up with that. That's still humans. We have plenty of examples from our own experience where like people respond to humans. People don't respond to like, you know, computer generated ad copy as much. So for us, like when we see a creator, for example, we worked with a brand called Cure, a hydration powder, excellent brand, highly recommend. And we paired them with an influencer named Caitlin. She's big time adulting. She has like 1.3 million followers. They're super dedicated. She went out for girls' night and like frankly just got like very drunk. And she was posting about it that night and like it was just kind of chaotic. It was very funny. The next day she's posting about like Cure being part of her recovery. Like that is not Cure's brand, you know, mission. Like that is not anywhere in their marketing copy, but obviously for them, it was great. She moved a ton of product that day and like they were happy with it. AI is not going to generate that kind of like storytelling arc. You know, there's no way that you're going to see like AI scripting her going out with her girlfriends on, you know, Friday night and then Saturday morning repping Cure and taking a Cure and talking about how it's going to help her hangover. Like that's still just people that are creative and weird and unusual. And, you know, I think that sort of shows the limits of AI more than anything else that we see.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, I would say that AI's best use is to like figure out what the median is or what the mean is. So actually like finding outliers or enabling outliers is actually not a good use of it because it is a statistical tool ultimately, right? So I think that some of the examples that we see that are actually very interesting are places where allowing for statistical based information to be given to the consumer is very helpful. So the most simple example is, let's just say you have a bunch of consumer reviews that you have gathered, right? Amazon has already started to do this, but you could do this yourself. You could just scrape all of your consumer reviews and then just ask ChatGPT to actually come up with a summary of that. You could ask ChatGPT then and say, hey, come up with a summary of this that actually specifically talks about what are the types of things that are interesting to the consumer based on sustainability, for example, right? It's like, hey, I love this brand because here are the 3 things that customers say about us that relate to sustainability about the brand. And that gives you tons of leverage, right? Because you're not sitting there trying to scrape through and understand every single thing. And honestly, consumers, they appreciate that you've synthesized that information for them, right? So I think that is like a very simple example of the ways that you could use AI. I also think that it is useful to think about what are the things that are actually like high data density things. So I mean, all the brands here, if you're not using like ASC in your meta campaigns, just to be like very tactical, that is a good example of you're trusting Meta's AI capabilities to actually show the right ads to the right people and then actually then drive those people to your page. How do you actually use AI to gather data points on your own website, right? So the more sophisticated brands, they're gathering data points across their entire website and understanding the consumer journey touch points on that website to then orchestrate the best possible consumer journey. What are the messages that you want to send in your email and SMS copy? That's at high scale. You can use AI to be able to do that. So those are the types of things that we are seeing people do, things that are statistically based, scale based, and I totally agree actually that if you want to drive outliers, you still need to trust people to do that.
I love that you already touched on this customer journey piece. Let's double click there a bit. Thinking about the role of personalizing more of these customer journeys, particularly as they become more and more complex though, what are some content tools? How are they evolving to really influence the online shopping experience? And how can brands really meet these individual needs now?
Yeah, so I'll take a crack. Yeah, I'll take a first stab. So I think that one of the things that we have seen people do is tell stories with the founder in the story. So it's become quite popular now where the founder is telling the story of the brand that they have made. And there are a bunch of tools like Maverick and a number of others that will just use generative AI to make the founder story being told in first person to the consumer, right? So it's like, hi, Jocelyn, and so on and so forth. And of course, you can like modulate the video and the audio to actually be able to use the person's name in that experience, right? Those types of tools are widely available at this point. All the way from that initial piece of content through to the actual experience, I think it is going to become more important to individually personalize. So of course, I'm sure all of you have gotten emails in your inbox about vendors who are saying, hey, we can personalize your email campaigns, right? So this is something that is, again, widely available. And then I think in the actual purchase journey, of which we are one of the people who does this, how do you make sure that everything from the landing experience to the collection page to your actual PDP? So does your PDP actually communicate information in a way that is personalized to that person, right? These are the types of questions that today, if I were to ask most of the brands who we get the chance to talk to, how do you guys personalize your PDP? They would just be like, okay, I mean, we can like personalize the landing page, but it's mildly annoying to have to like sit there and think about all the different ways we can re-architect the actual PDP. And so thinking about the full funnel, because these types of things are now possible, is actually is where you're going to get a lot of alpha in your marketing.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think also, something we talk a lot about is just like leveraging a bunch of platforms and obviously reducing reliance on just Meta and paid spend. And I think for us, like when we look at creators, when we look at the reach of a talent partner, like we're looking at, do they have an email newsletter that's really like Arnold Schwarzenegger has an email newsletter that's like beloved, like those people that are reading that and engaging with him every day, his recommendation to them, he's like a regular part of their lives. And so, his recommendations go farther. So we look at like, do they have a podcast? Do they have an email newsletter? Are they a frequent guest on, The View or something like that? So I think like just thinking about where your customer, what they're paying attention to beyond Instagram and beyond TikTok is also a really valuable place to consider sort of a full consumer journey and everything that they're doing in their lives.
Gotcha. So then let's talk about channels a bit, because you talked about kind of diversifying away from just Meta. I'm going to turn to Rishabh on this one, actually, and talk about TikTok. So this week it was.
I have a face for TikTok. It's quite obvious. So.
Yeah, he's mega influencer there. So just a couple days ago, it was reported that ByteDance, so TikTok's parent company, posted their Q3 earnings from last year, and they grew 43% up to $30.9 billion. This is nearly twice the growth rate of Meta, just for comparison. And this is probably supported by their efforts in advertising and also in e-commerce sales. So it's hard to ignore. And I know that Rishabh, you must have some pretty hot takes on this. So my question is, how should brands be taking advantage of TikTok Shops as a new fast-growing social e-commerce platform? And by social, I mean entertainment-driven in terms of content.
Yeah, totally. I would love to talk about the actual Shops experience, but then I really want to hear your view on sort of how influencers you work with are thinking about it as a revenue stream, because it's, in some cases, it can be driving like actually tremendous revenue. So at least what we see is that the investment into TikTok Shop, so I mean, ByteDance has done this historically, right? The actual rise of TikTok itself is a consequence of incredible paid media spend on Facebook and then driving consumers into TikTok. And then now Shops is basically, they're subsidizing the cost of products and driving an incredible amount of GMV by basically giving deals to people. So if you see the top products in almost every category, they're products that are under $50, and then the incentive happens to be $20. So it's like, it's almost a 50% discount on the large majority of products that are being sold at high volume through TikTok. So something to consider is how you want the brand to be received by your consumers. Is that discount something that is going to impact your LTV? I don't know if it will be, right? I'm not making the suggestion that it will or will not, but it is a question that is worth asking, because the way the consumer is buying the product through TikTok Shops is actually very unique. Now, I also think that Meta already learned a lot from Meta Shops 2 years ago, and learned that basically dwell time actually reduces on app when you have shops competing for the same inventory as you do ad space and actual native content. And so that is something I think long term is going to be a big question. So my my like sort of short version of this is, while the going is good and TikTok wants to give away money, I would take it personally. Right now, what I don't know is long term if it's a good strategy and what are the strategies you should be testing against and deploying against in order to continue sustainable growth for your brand. But yeah, I'm really curious what you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think from the first part of what you were saying, like most of the brands that we're working with, to be honest, have been a little bit timid in terms of leveraging TikTok as a channel that they're modeling out as anything more than like a test and learn. Like they're not sort of building that into their marketing spend and strategy in a big way just yet. I'm sure it'll come. I think one thing that's important about the companies that we're working with when we're bringing on talent, so much of their focus when they're working with us is on organic. So they're, sort of looking to us and being like, we're just not getting the performance out of our meta spend that we used to. So what we're looking for is a recognizable person who has a really big following and who organically can make a big impact on our brand where we don't have to, spend a cent. And so for us, like what we would say to them is, if TikTok is a really important part of your strategy and you want to sort of, be able to leverage people who have that sort of organic reach on TikTok, we can look there. But if sort of like your brand isn't even really going all in on TikTok, it probably doesn't make sense to focus on those creators just yet. So I'm really curious what will happen. For the most part, the companies that we're working with right now, from like a margin standpoint, from just like an efficiency and sort of, cash constraint standpoint at this time, like have not really delved into it too much.
Gotcha. Switching gears, it's always tough to be the panel right before lunch. But so let's talk about cookies and how they're going away. So as part of following the footsteps, I guess, of Firefox and Safari, you might have heard that Google has this privacy sandbox initiative where essentially it's already happening. Third-party cookies are being deprecated, going away. So how should brands be thinking about advertising in this cookieless world? Love to know your thoughts on brands gathering first-party data as part of their strategy. And I know you have experience from your days at Quartz as well. So curious what you guys think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, prior to this role, I was at a digital publisher called Quartz, and prior to that, I was an agency. So I certainly have a lot of experience in the world of like, we were talking about this earlier. It was almost just an equation. You're like, spend this, get this many impressions, it generates to this many leads. And we were like on the money every time. I mean, it just felt like it was like a straight linear equation towards that. And obviously that's really changing. And I think it's a good thing. I think, from where we stand now in terms of just creativity required for brands to stand out, I think it's really good if we're getting to a place where brands have to think more strategically about the creativity of their brand, their positioning, how they stand out, how they're differentiated, rather than just how much can we shovel into Meta and see where that gets us. Because that's not the way to generate loyal customers. Like customers are going to keep coming back because you're creative and you appeal to them and they feel aligned with your brand, especially Gen Z, which is a whole other story, just in terms of like values-based purchasing. So I think for this, it feels like while it's harder, it's really, it's hard to like come up with really creative strategies or invest in a newsletter or invest in like IRL activations. And the ROI, I think, can be, it's not as tidy as like just investing a bunch in Instagram ads. I think it's actually long-term going to benefit companies in a really major way. Obviously, we think about that from talent, but I think you can also think about it just from like a brand marketing creativity standpoint, as well as really optimizing your own platforms. And I think like thinking a little bit more strategically about like, how do we optimize our site? How do we, how do we partner with a podcast? Whatever the other channels you have to play with, like I think people are getting more strategic about that, which I think is a really good thing.
Yeah, I think my quick 2 cents on this is when Apple announced you're no longer allowed to track people from app to website, people were at first, I think, unsure of what the impact was going to be, and then it caught most of us by surprise. And it's like, oh my God, this is really bad. And the effectiveness of ad campaigns, because like, as an industry, we're spending a lot on ads, was very dramatic. My hope and my belief is that this time around it's not going to be quite so dramatic, because a lot of people are investing in strategies that are not so paid focused as it is, because that first ATT switch actually pushed people to say, hey, what are other ways that I can measure my marketing? What are other ways that I can deploy my spend? When Google takes away the third-party cookie or turns it off by the end of this year, I think it'll just mean that we have to do more things by way of measurement, like incrementality testing and media mix modeling and all the other things that we do anyways if we're omni-channel marketers. And so it just means we're going to have to use those tools more often in order to understand which one of our channels are actually incremental and are effective for us. And I think that, yes, obviously targeting is going to get worse, but I suspect that with the ways in which we are doing a much wider variation of creative and much broader creative strategy as is, I think that we're going to be way more prepared this time around than we were last time around. And so I'm not as nervous, but it's going to put a lot of pressure on your marketer to be more statistical and be able to present data from media mix models and from incrementality studies and from other types of devices that help you understand where your spend is going to be most effective.
Totally. Yeah. Actually, quick plug, I guess, one of my portfolio companies, TopSort, which just announced their A round this week, they developed an auction-based advertising platform for businesses. And they have this thing called the Clean Room, which basically combines user data from retailers and vendors without compromising user privacy. So TopSort, I think it's really cool what they're doing. All right, shifting gears, would love to talk about creative content collaboration. So Jocelyn, not only are you the queen of adorable skirts, but you also specialize in these amazing creative talent partnerships. So I'd love to kind of understand, like, what's your playbook for developing these talent partnerships, particularly with the caliber of talent that you're working with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for all the reasons that we're talking about, like being able to attach your brand to a clear perspective that resonates with your customers is just getting more and more critical. And I think, one really great thing about that is sort of from the example I gave about Cure, like sometimes partnering with an actual human can also give you some creative license to sort of a little bit, stray from your like really strict brand identity talking points. It sort of lets your brand breathe a little bit in a way that it's a little bit hard to when there's not a person attached. So for us, what we're looking for when we are working with brands is to find people, like I said, that can be athletes, musicians, actors, creators, media personalities, whatever, as long as they have a pretty decent following and also have a really clear perspective. The perspective thing is really important. Like people respond to people that are going to take a stand or, have a really unique sense of humor or a personal style that people kind of recognize. So we're looking for these perspectives and then matching those perspectives with that of a target demo. So that's what we're looking for when we're doing our partnerships. What we say when we're working with brands is basically like, we want to present you a list where you don't recognize 80% of the names on the list. Because I think that's another really hard thing for marketers. You know your brand so well, you know your demos so well, and you think that you know the talent that might represent your brand really well. But the fact is, like, there's just a ton of people out there, and there's probably people that could be really valuable to your brand that your small team has never heard of. So we think a lot about that. And then the other thing we think a lot about is just sort of equity for creators. Like a lot of these people have worked really hard to develop that personal perspective or develop their identity, and they want to capitalize on it. And I think that's awesome. They should get paid for their work. And so what we advocate for the brands that we work with is that you're ready to give those people a cut of equity also, and really get them invested in the brand, make sure that the incentives are super aligned, and let them sort of, like actually earn off of their creativity and how it can help your brand. Because I think for a long time, these types of deals for a lot of creative people have felt a little bit predatory. And our goal is that they are getting compensated for all of the hard work they put into their creativity and their identity.
I have very little to add other than to say that I think creator-led brands are obviously way more effective to attach to as a consumer, and Ridge partnering with MKBHD, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, or at least making the announcement 2 weeks ago, I thought was a brilliant move by Sean. So yeah, I mean, it at least to me, it is just very, very obvious that it's going to be the way that we build brands in the future. It's you have faces that you can attach to brands, not just some name. So.
And Rishabh, I don't know if the audience actually appreciates this, but you work with like 100 different brands, ranging from like $5 to $100 million in revenue, like big companies. I'm curious what both of you have seen in terms of just really unique, creative ways brands are leveraging cost-effective marketing channels or tactics. I know you had an example we talked about earlier with the shower company. So yeah, would love to hear what you've seen on the ground.
Sure. So this is I guess a friend in the industry. This company called, he talks about it publicly, so I'm sure it's totally fine to share. But there's this company called Jolie, which makes basically skincare products. It is a filtered shower head, and the types of marketing they do is just absolutely incredible. So Arjun has told the story many times, Ryan has told the story many times, but they do things like they put banners on trucks and they say, this truck is as dirty as your water, right? Or they have stickers on the floor that say, like outside of a bar, that say, you know, is your martini dirtier than your tap water, right? And so they're just like very creative in terms of the ways in which they are deploying their strategy. And I admire what they do a lot. And I think that enables them to be very cost effective. It's not a direct one-to-one measurable ROI, but they see it in terms of their P&L. So it's like, here's how many dollars are going in, here's how many dollars are coming out, and here's the way that it actually enables us to be more effective in our ad spend as well. And so I think that, yeah, there's definitely both out-of-home activations and then digital ways that you can start to be more creative. And yes, it means you have to be less one-to-one about your measurement, but they can be way more cost effective.
Yeah, I think for me, it just comes down to like a brand's ability to be flexible and creative and take, opportunity when it presents itself. Like I have friends who operate a brand out of LA, and they were mentioned on this podcast that has a pretty devoted listener base for sure. And they didn't, it was an organic opportunity. They didn't seed product. It was just kind of a happy circumstance. But like the listeners of this podcast and the YouTube viewers of this podcast were so rabid that they cleared the brand of inventory. And they responded by like creating a special product that was specific to the brand and also sort of referencing the audience in their email newsletter. Like, I think, you got to be willing to kind of pause other plans and really be flexible and a little bit, risky in terms of your ability to welcome new audiences and try out new creative executions like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Do I have time for one more question or no? Okay. I'm getting the head shot. Well, then thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights. I really appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, everyone.